Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Reactor live stream. My name is Nadia, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. Before we dive into the main event, I just want to remind everyone about the Reactor Code of Conduct. Our aim is to cultivate a positive and inclusive environment for all our participants. So please, let's keep our interactions respectful and supportive. Today, we are joined by Aaron, who is a cloud developer advocate here at Microsoft. And Aaron will be taking us through some exciting news that's come out of MS Build last week. Throughout the session, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to address as many as possible. And for those who want to revisit today's session, you can catch the recording later on our Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's give a warm virtual round of applause to our great speaker, Aaron. Hey, Aaron.
I don't have my virtual applause button on my stream deck anymore. So I can't give myself my own round of applause, but we'll have to just do with that. Well, thanks for having me on, Nadia. Let's get underway. Thanks everyone who's joining us here today, or who's watching the recording, if that's how you're catching up on this. My name is Aaron Powell. I'm in the cloud advocacy team at Microsoft, and I've spent the last week, most of the last week, catching up on all the stuff from Build, and I wanted to do a bit of a session of what I thought was really cool that was announced at Build or was shown off at Build and that kind of stuff. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to kind of run through some of my top picks from session highlights, from the sessions to go back and watch, and things that I reckon you should know about from Build. But to kick things off, well, there was one topic that I think I'd be remiss not starting with, and that was Copilot. This year, like we've seen the trend over the past couple of years, AI and the family of Copilots here at Microsoft are obviously a big push that we've got with inside of what we're building and how we're enabling people to build new style applications and build new capabilities into their applications that they're working on today. So the first thing I want to touch on is, well, it's actually an announcement that came out about a day before Build, and that was the Copilot Plus PCs from Microsoft. So this is a new range of ARM-based computers that we're putting into the Surface family of hardware. And what kind of makes these interesting is, well, first off, they're using an ARM CPU rather than an x86 architecture, as traditionally has been done with Windows. And in addition to that, they're going to have a NPU, or a neural processing unit, in them, as well as the GPU and CPU, which you would find in a computer these days. And that means that we're going to be able to do more with AI on the device and not just rely on cloud services. This means that we're going to have the ability to bring more AI features into Windows to support the kind of things that you're doing and to make it easier for you to leverage the stuff that's been happening in this space. Like I've been playing around with things like Windows Copilot, and I kind of can't live without this stuff now. Even earlier today, I was trying to find a piece of software and I couldn't remember what it was called. So I just opened up Windows Copilot and described the thing that I was looking for, and went, here is the download link for it. And I went and downloaded and installed that. You can find more about the Copilot Plus PCs and that announcement and stuff at the link that's there on bottom. I've also put QR codes as much as I can throughout these slides to link to those, because I know that they're kind of big, long URLs that are appearing on these slides, and taking screenshots or photographing them or trying to frantically type them down, it can be a bit of a challenge. But you can scan the QR code and it should hopefully take you to the correct link, because I did a lot of QR codes and I think I got them all correct. All right. Moving on from kind of the Windows side of Copilot, the other thing that was that I thought was really cool, and something that I've been meaning to play around with, is the Microsoft Copilot family and the extensibility stuff that we've got, particularly with like Copilot Studio and some of the VS Code tooling we've got for working with extensions for building Copilots. So this session here from Dave and Bob. So Bob's on a sibling team to myself, and David is from one of the product groups. Forget exactly which one. Anyway, they do show how to use the VS Code extensions for building Copilot. It's the Teams Toolkit extension. So building out an extensibility for the Copilot family. So, and this was another thing that was announced to Build, was the kind of unification of the way that we do Copilot extensions. No longer are you building extension just for like Teams Copilot or for M365 Copilot or for Windows Copilot, et cetera, et cetera. It's now more of a unified approach. So you can do something, and what the folks talk about in this session and they demo in this session is they literally take an existing set of HTTP endpoints and then turn that into something that is consumable from a Copilot, so that you can then have that brought into Teams, you can have that brought into M365, wherever the place that you're wanting to interact with this. Speaking of Teams, there was the announcement of the Teams Copilot, which is a new assistant embedded with inside of Teams that you can add as a collaborator inside of a meeting. You can add to group chats, things like that. So they can then they're not a person. It's an AI, but the Teams Copilot can take meeting notes for you that you can then collaborate with it. So as the meeting is going on, it'll write out notes of what is being gleaned from the transcript and from the people talking. But then you can go and edit those dynamically so that you're getting your input and it's giving you maybe that starting point for your note taking. It'll even do things like generate out follow-up actions and assign tasks to people as a result of that. In group chats, you can embed this and you can have that then like summarize documents for you and keep you up to date in what's happening if you haven't been able to drop into the chat for a couple of days, if you've been catching up on all the other exciting stuff from Build. But moving on from Copilots, I want to talk about kind of the AI suite in general with inside of Azure. So Azure AI Services had a heap of announcements for them, and I will not be able to touch on all of these. Like we're trying to condense 3 days into roughly 30 minutes, so this is a lot of different things that happen. But some of the top announcements that I've been following out of Build was GPT 3.4.0. So that's the new model from OpenAI that was announced about a week before Build. That's now generally available through Azure OpenAI Service. Additionally, Azure OpenAI Service has some more support for working with local models. I'll talk a bit more about local models in a moment, though. But there's a bunch more small language models and local models that you can work with inside of Azure OpenAI Azure AI Services. We've got more support with inside of Azure AI Search for vectors. So we can do vectors of different data types, so blobs and things like that, as well as some more configuration options with vectors. So we can change like the weighting that vectors have with inside of our search if we're using it in a hybrid search. So bringing traditional keyword searching or traditional approaches to searching, combining that with vectors for getting semantic results, we can weight those vectors in a way that's going to make sense for the relevancy we want them to have compared to other search results we have. Azure AI Studio, which is kind of your one-stop shop for working with AI services on Azure, that's now generally available. So, and that's just part of the Azure AI services. So if you deploy an Azure AI service, you get AI Studio as part of that. And that's where you have like a playground. You can so do like chat. The Assistance API is also available there, and that's now available as part of Azure OpenAI Service. And like image generation, working with things like prompt flow, you can do all that prototyping with inside of Azure AI Studio now. Told you there's a lot, but a couple of my pick sessions around AI topics. This generative AI experiences with Phi. So Phi, or Phi 3, is a new model that, or a new generation of model that we've announced. We've had the Phi models have obviously been around for a couple of iterations now, and it's what we call a small language model. So OpenAI is producing these large language models, and your GPT models, they're large language models. Small language models are the same fundamental concept of what they're doing, but much smaller in scale. They don't take as much memory, they don't require as many hardware resources, but they also don't have the same level of complexity to them, and they might not have the same quote unquote intelligence behind them. But these small language models can be useful for running locally on your own machine, like a desktop or a laptop or something like that. You can embed them into applications a lot easier because they're only a couple of gigabytes instead of tens or hundreds of gigabytes, potentially even terabytes, depending on the scale of the model. Like because of that, you can build them for more versatile set of applications. And another thing that the folks show off inside of this session is the newly announced extension for VS Code for working with local models. So this is called the AI Toolkit, and this works with the Onyx runtime. So Onyx is a runtime for kind of normalizing models from different sources like PyTorch, TensorFlow, etc. So you can bring in those models locally and work with them. And I actually just wanted to do a demo of the AI Toolkit because I actually think it's really kind of cool. So I've got AI Toolkit here installed in my VS Code already, and it gives me a new icon here in my sidebar. If I pop this open, it's just going to load up the extension, warm it up, and it will give me a list of all the models that I have on my machine and that I'm able to play with. You can also go over to the model catalog and see models that you might want to download. So here we'll see there's 8 different models available. We've got a couple from Mistral, and it also gives you information about them. So their size, the number of parameters. So like these Mistral models, so these are 7 billion parameter models. And this one here is designed to run on CPU, whereas the other one is for GPU. So that's kind of where your resource loading is going to be. I have a decent enough GPU in here, so I can run GPU-based models rather than rely on CPU. GPU models are generally going to be a little bit faster. But I've already downloaded one of the Phi 3 Mini models. So this is a small language model. This is only 2.13 gig as a download. So it's small. It's small relative in scale. And what I can do is I can click Load in Playground. And now I've got a little playground where I can work with this model. I kind of like you would do through AI Studio. So I can ask it a question of, say, what is new in the Phi 3 model? And then this is running entirely locally on my machine. Look how quick that was. Like it was really fast in its response time because we obviously don't have network traffic or have to do or anything like that. But you can obviously play around with this, modify things like your different parameters for the model, so temperature and p-top and all that kind of stuff. But what's also really cool with this extension, because it's running on Onyx, we can use that with then the Olive component to Onyx, which allows us to run it as a server. So what I've got here is I've got this Polyglot notebook. So I've got just some C# code here where I'm pulling in the Azure OpenAI SDK, and then I am creating a new OpenAI client. And the way that this extension works is it actually creates a web server that is compatible with the OpenAI SDK. So I'm just saying that, well, I'm going to override the endpoint, and I'm actually going to be pointing to my local host endpoint here. And then I create an OpenAI, just fake out that we've got an API key because we don't actually have that. We're going to run this here because we don't. I'm not doing authentication on this local model. And now I'm going to create a new chat request. So what's the chat completion model? I'm giving it the model that I'm going to work with is my local Onyx model here that's running on DirectML, so on my GPU. Give it a system message that this is a system that answers questions with Australianisms, and then what is the capital of Australia? We hit fire off on that, and then super quickly we've got a response back. 100% local running of this, which means that I can do a lot more rapid prototyping of this. Now, the Phi 3 models family is available through Azure AI Service, so we can deploy this same model in the cloud. Phi 3 Mini, Phi 3 Vision, Phi 3 Small, Phi 3 Normal, I think is there's a couple of different sizes of this. Obviously, the Mini is the one I'm running here locally. We can also, with this extension, do model fine-tuning. So I can then go through the process of creating a customized version of this model, using this Phi 3 as a foundational model, create my own customizations on top of that, and then have those deployed through my MLOps pipeline up to Azure, and then use a cloud-based resource if that's the way I want to do it. Or I can deploy out my customized model kind of embedded in my application or whatever the case may be. Go check out this session. They dive a lot more into how we can use this extension and how we can work with these local models. All right, another couple of quick ones that I saw, and these are some announcements that were kind of around build. Azure SQL Server. Azure SQL now has support for vectors in private preview. So if you're building applications where you want to use a vector store with that, and maybe you've already got an existing Azure SQL database with your data in it, well, you can now request access to the private preview, have vectors enabled, and then you can use a model that is capable of generating those vectors, such as the added model family from OpenAI, and then pop those into your SQL database to use, and then do relational queries that are also containing semantic result sets. The Azure OpenAI extension for Azure Functions is now available. So you can use this to do bindings with Azure Functions the kind of same way as you would do to queues, service bus, so on and so forth. Now we can combine that with OpenAI requests. So we can chat, assistance API, and embeddings and kind of read and write operations. So we could say combine the embeddings along with a vector database so that we can get Azure Functions to do our ingestion of our data, turn those into vectors, and then store those into our vector database without having to write all that kind of plumbing code to connect to databases and data stores and all that stuff. So there's some great documentation there on our Microsoft Learn platform that covers off all the different runtimes, .NET, JavaScript, so on and so forth. Okay. Let's put AI aside for the moment, and let's talk about dev tooling, because I'm a developer at heart. So I want to talk about the things that I saw that were really excite me in the dev tooling space at Build this year. First off is this wasn't actually from a session at Build. It was just something that I saw got announced at the same time as Build, and that's an extension for Winget. So Winget being the package manager or the software manager on Windows. It's for command not found. I've just set up a brand new machine, so I'm constantly typing stuff on the command line and realizing I haven't installed that software, like JQ for parsing JSON, for example. But now with this extension, you type a command, and if it wasn't something you had installed, it will then suggest you packages on Winget that you might want to install that will do that. Like just small quality of life improvements, like that kind of stuff is rare. Like just. It saves you then having to go out and like web searching for like, where's the download link or what, like Winget search and try and figure out what package you might actually be wanting there. Another one, sudo for Windows. So I don't know how many people are aware, but Windows, as of a couple of pre-releases ago, got support for sudo. So this means you can elevate from a command prompt without having to start a new elevated command prompt. They actually open source this at Build, like live with inside the session. They open source this, so you can check that out on GitHub, github.com/Microsoft/sudo. If you want, it's written in Rust. You can enable that feature if you're on a Windows 11 build newer than the one that it's referencing there. Was it 26045 or newer? I actually used it for the first time yesterday. I had to install a package using Winget. I just went sudo winget install package name, and it worked. I was like, this is so cool. Just pops up my UAC dialog. Click yes and install. Like great. So nice not to have to go. That's right. Need to run an elevated command prompt first. Now, if you're a developer on Windows and you've only got time to kind of watch one session, this is the session I reckon you should watch. This is a session with Scott Hansman and a couple of other program managers and engineers at Microsoft, where they kind of talk about just productivity tips for developing on Windows. They cover off things like Dev Home and Dev Drive. So Dev Home is like your developer dashboard with inside of Windows, so you can connect to GitHub. You can have like all your different repos on there, manage cloning your repos and stuff like that, setting up your environment just as you need, and then have like pre-configured profiles with inside of Dev Home so you can swap between. And then Dev Drives are it's using the REFS file system. So it's the file systems that actually come from the Windows Server family that are more optimized for, has been optimized for working with and things that do a lot of file system access, so like coding. I've just set up a dev drive on my new machine, so I'm looking forward to playing with that. But at the same time, like they cover just like not necessarily stuff that's new with inside of Windows or new with inside of the dev tooling space, but things that have just been there that you might not know about. Like I didn't know that you can enable a feature in Windows, so you can right-click on the taskbar on an application in the taskbar and end task. After watching that session, that was one of the first things I did was when I enabled that feature, and it saves me opening up Task Manager and then finding the process and then terminating it there. Right-click, end task. Why isn't that just on by default? And one of the engineers from Windows Terminal was showing off some of the features that are coming in the preview builds of Windows Terminal, such as Control-Shift-M goes into Mark mode, and then you do Shift-Tab, and it navigates backwards through all the URLs. And I'm just like, where has this been all my life? Like I create a pull, I push a new branch and to GitHub and wants me to do a pull request, and Control-Shift-M, Shift-Tab, enter, and then it launches the pull request window on GitHub for me. And I was like, don't have to take my hands off the keyboard onto the mouse and navigate around the terminal. But then there was like a whole bunch of other just like little tips and tricks around how to work with just getting the most out of working on Windows, things with Power Toys and stuff like that. I said, I really would highly recommend this session. Go check it out. It might not be, brand new announcements or anything like that, but it's just going to it's just those sorts of things that makes your life so much better as a developer. All right, now the last section I really want to cover off is what's new in the .NET and the VS side of things, because .NET is where I spend most of my development. Have spent most of my development career, and it's where I spend most of my time these days. And there was one particular announcement I was hanging out for, and that was .NET Aspire. So .NET Aspire, if you haven't been following along, so it went generally available, or GA, at Build, and .NET Aspire is an orchestration framework for building distributed applications with .NET. And actually, it's not just .NET. Like, you can bring in applications that are built on other runtimes, JavaScript, Java, etc. Like, you can have Aspire manage those. So if you're building distributed applications, Aspire is actually a really great tool for doing that. It takes the approach of, you define the resources that you have within inside of your infrastructure. You do that entirely in code, and then Aspire manages the local dev experience for that. So in Visual Studio, you hit F5 and it will start up all these additional services that you need, and then spin them down and stuff like that. To really kind of get a good grasp of what you can do with Aspire, check out this session from Damien Edwards and David Fowler on .NET Aspire, where they go through adding it to an existing project. But let's just show you kind of what Aspire looks like, because I actually have an application running here with Aspire. If I can find it, there it is. So this is an application. It's got a couple of web components to it, so a couple of .NET applications run. One is a web application. The other is some background services. Or there's a background service, another web application. So it's two web UIs written in Blazor, and you can see they're running here at these various HTTP endpoints. And then I've got a console application that's going to be provisioning my database using EF Code First Migrations. So it does that kind of as everything starts up. Now this application is allowing you to do semantic searches across YouTube videos. So I have a Postgres database that's got the PG vector extension installed. So when I hit F5, it's going to stand me up a Postgres database with inside of a container using PG vector. I've then also got it adding the PG admin tool, so that I can come into my database and be like, okay, my database, let's have a look at that. So here's the databases that's in vectors. Let's find a table, and then I can execute queries. So I haven't had to install locally any kind of like management tools or database access UIs or anything like that. It's launched as part of my application. And then from the web application, I can pop that URL over here. And I ran my demo beforehand just so that it was didn't have to wait for it. But I can ask it a question. So like, I want to learn about .NET Aspire, and this is searching the .NET YouTube channel, and it's going, well, these are some videos that have recently been published on the YouTube channel that you should go to check out that meets that. Now, the other thing with Aspire is that it has a bunch of opinionated defaults for things like logging and telemetry built into it. So from this dashboard, I can go into, say, the structured logs for my client, and I can see what was happening. So I had a warning response came back here, and I can take a look into that trace if I want. I can go back through and see everything that kind of happened in here. So like the application, there's where the application started. It got credentials to log in using managed identity to OpenAI service. We obviously had an identity issue initially, so it's had to refresh the token. We'll see that happens down here. But I can also come into traces. So let's have a look at this this trace here, where it has a warning. So here is that full end-to-end trace that's happened with inside of my application. We see that the YouTube client application initially did a request out to this IP address and to refresh the token. That came back with an error. So then it went to the actual OpenAI service that I've got deployed, and then access to my my Postgres database. So I can create a connection to there. And then we can see what's happening in all of the responses that come back. We can see the request that happened. I don't have detailed logging enabled into some of these requests at the moment, just because it's not to dump out data, but we can see, like how long different things took with inside of that. And we'll see that overall, the longest thing that was happening was this request here to OpenAI service. which was the final request that goes out and generates the answers back for it. So we can see that's to a GPT-4 chat completion endpoint. And we can then also dive into a whole bunch of different metrics and stuff like that. So we can see what happened, where things might have been taking a bit of time. And then, like I said, this is all entirely defined in code. So here is my my Aspire app host configuration. So I've defined that I'm creating a distributed application. I'm adding OpenAI service, or just going for connection string if I'm not if I've got one provided, which is what I'm using locally. Creating a Postgres database, and if we're in development, then I'm going to be using the PG vector container with a Postgres with a particular image, and then doing some setup for that. If we're publishing, so publishing to Azure, well, then I'm going to be using Postgres Flexible Server with vector support, and that's going to be deploying me an Azure resource instead of running a local container. So the Azure Postgres Flexible database is then going to enable PG vector with inside of that deployed Azure resource, and that can all get up and running. And then have a couple of projects. So my data ingester, my database migrator, and then my web client. And then I provide resources such as they're going to need AI, they're going to need access to various databases. So we just provide that all done in code, no YAML or anything like that, and then everything gets up and running. But do check out this session from David and Damien if you want to learn more about .NET Aspire, and they obviously will go through it in much more detail than I've done in the last 2.5 minutes. And continue on the Aspire train. There's another session if you're not doing development in Windows, or your Visual Studio is not your core development tool. Check out this session from Brady and Wendy, where they cover off how to use I think the new VS Code C# dev kit. Well, it's not kind of new, but some of the new features of C# dev kit. Things like hot reload are now there, which is like a lifesaver if you're doing web UIs, because now I just hit hot reload and it's just going to reload just the Blazor components that I'm working with, rather than having to restart the full service. There's some of the cool stuff with the test integration, so you can just run and debug your tests with inside of VS Code, which is obviously going to be great if you're not working on a Windows environment and you don't have access to Visual Studio. Brady also shows off some of the .NET command line tooling that they're working on, or they're experimenting with for scaffolding applications with .NET Aspire. And also there's a couple other things with C# dev kit, like the new NuGet integration, so that you can add and install NuGet packages straight from the command palette. No need to drop to the command line if you don't want to drop there, or edit CS proj files manually. And from a Visual Studio perspective, obviously Visual Studio being the cornerstone of a .NET developer's experience. This session where they cover off what's new with GitHub Copilot and Visual Studio, because they're doing a lot of work to integrate GitHub Copilot even more into Visual Studio. Now, I've been using Visual Studio for doing the math today, nearly 20 years, and I'm just kind of set in my ways in the way that things work. I didn't realize some of the deep integrations that GitHub Copilot now has with inside of it. So obviously we've got things like GitHub Copilot chat, so we can ask it open-ended questions and engage with it that way. We've got GitHub Copilot for doing generating ghost text and suggestions for how we write out our code, so that you just become a developer that just hits tab and just goes out that way. But there was some other stuff that they added, things like there's an Ask VS feature. So if you're trying to figure out there's a setting that you want to enable, or a feature that you're sure, but you can't remember what it's called, you can just ask GitHub Copilot using Ask VS, and it will, rather than giving you kind of a web searched answer, it says, well, here's the thing to do in Visual Studio to enable that feature. I was like, oh, that's so cool, because I'm constantly forgetting the names of features. I turn them on and I don't then think to change them for months or even years on end. It's only until you set up a new PC and you're like, what was that feature to turn on? But also stuff like they show how writing some they're writing new tests, and those tests are failing, and going into the error window and just selecting the error messages and then sending those to GitHub Copilot. Now, because then you're sending the entire context of the error message and it's aware of the code base that you're working with, it can suggest to you, well, here's the code fixes really targeted to what you need to do. So it explains what the problem is, explains what the fixes are, and gives you the code to then correct the problem. They also brought on one of the engineers working on the GitHub Copilot integration in Visual Studio, showing off a feature that's still not released. So it is a little bit a little bit of hit and miss in how it works, but it's using GitHub Copilot as a debugging assistant within inside of tests for VS. So you've got a failing test, and it shows off this like debug the test with Copilot. And what it does is Copilot will start up the test runner for you, attach the debugger, but then automatically put breakpoints where it seems like the most logical place to do that. So, and then when it hits the breakpoint, it brings in state that's happening, like what's in the variables, what's in the locals and stuff like that, and then gives you just immediately gives you answers to it. That is so cool. I can't wait for that feature to become available, because I think that's going to just make it so much easier to jump into a brand new code base and start debugging through a test. All right, we're just about out of time. And I know that there was a really super fast run through of like a bunch of stuff, but there are like so many more sessions that I want to call out that I haven't necessarily got time to watching myself, or they're just too many sessions to cover cover off today. But here are a couple of ones, and sorry, I didn't put the QR codes for these just because the slides were going to be too dense with QR codes. But these are the names of the sessions within inside of the session builder for build. So just if you open up if you register for build for the on-demand sessions, you can search for these by name. And so Mark Brzezinovich has a great session about AI security, which I think anyone that's looking to bring AI into their applications, definitely check that out, because it's very much top of mind for us here at Microsoft, of how we make sure that we're using AI not just securely within inside of the applications, but thinking of that as a potential attack vector. There's another one about data security considerations, like how are you doing that kind of data isolation when working with AI applications. Check out the session on dev boxes if cloud-based development is something that's of interest to you. This is where you can pre-provision essentially Windows VMs that have all the stuff you're going to kind of need to build like an application. But it just means that you don't have to necessarily have everything installed locally. You can do that in a more of a remote environment. So that just gives you the potential for a more flexible working environment. A session I haven't got yet to watching, but it's definitely one of the next one I'm going to get to, is how GitHub builds GitHub on GitHub. Like I've known for years, obviously, that GitHub uses GitHub as like they dog food, and that's how they build. But this, like, I want to learn more about how they are leveraging, like, how to I guess make the most out of GitHub. There probably aren't any like major announcements or anything in that, but like the Windows developer session I talked about earlier, it's just picking up tips and tricks from the people that live and use this stuff day in, day out. And another set of sessions that I haven't actually got to yet, but again, I would totally recommend. If you're deploying to Azure and working in teams, I would definitely check out the Azure deployment environments. This is something we announced at last build, and there's been a whole bunch of work that's done to make Azure deployment environments easier to use. So this allows you to set up new environments, basically, through pull requests and stuff like that, so that you have the ability to test changes in these isolated development environments that live for the life cycle of, say, a pull request, or for kind of the scopings that you're going to require, rather than having to give subscriptions out to all developers. You can have a lot more management approaches on that. The other last two sessions, something that I was going to put in here and kind of dive a bit more into is GitHub Copilot extensions. We announced that there's some announcements around GitHub Copilot extensions. We have an Azure extension, so you can ask it Azure specific questions around like your resources and things like that. And there's also a session around how to extend GitHub Copilot, so go check that one out. And another session that I haven't got to yet, but is very much on the top of my to-watch list, is the session of running .NET on a NES, on an NES. I mean, it's not necessarily something that I'm going to be needing to do, but I think it's kind of cool to see how far we can push technology. Like, particularly as a .NET developer, pushing it kind of to the point of running it on a NES, I think is like a really, really interesting idea. But that's about all I've got time for today. I know that was a lot. Like we powered through 3 days of build in a very short period of time. But hopefully it was enough to give you a taster of the things that I thought were really cool that came out of build. It gives you some ideas of sessions that you might want to go and check out. And at the very least, give you an appetite to go out there and learn more. But thanks for joining us on the Reactor stream today. My name is Aaron Powell. Feel free to reach out to me on various social medias and stuff like that if you do want to. Nadia, I see you're back.
Awesome. I am. Hi. I'll add a few of those links as well into the Meetup event page so people can go back and have a look.
Yep.
But I wanted to say thanks so much for that recap, Aaron. 3 days into 35 minutes. Done a great job. So thank you all for joining.
Take a breath now.
I know. And we'll see you all on our next Microsoft Reactor live stream. So bye for now.
Bye, everyone.